Kate, I thought we would talk about the role of SMEs in public sector, their inclusion, and I thought it would be nice to talk about some of the challenges that have happened in the past and the current situation today, and use some of your expert knowledge to talk about what needs to happen in the future. My image of SME inclusion is that it's been quite tough in the past. Is that portrayal correct? What are your what are your thoughts on inclusion in the past?
Yeah, I would say that in the past, SME inclusion has been very difficult. And before G-Cloud came about, it was extremely hard to get into public sector. We certainly never really sold anything. I mean,
Right.
the occasional GP surgery or something like that, but never anything really serious. And G-Cloud was intended partly to address that problem. There were, this oligopoly of a small number of suppliers who were dominating the marketplace, arguably not delivering very good value.
Right.
So there was a real imperative for the taxpayer, as well as trying to support these innovative businesses that could bring, real value to government, as well as being real engines of growth for the economy. So yes, it was difficult because you had to go through tenders for everything. And although they have their merit, time and again, we did try a few, but time and again you'd find that they'd really been scripted for a particular company,
Right.
and it became quite clear of that. Or they would bundle everything together. So you'd be needing to do desktops and mobile phones, as well as servers and sort of data center infrastructure, including supporting everything from the latest hardware down to some ancient mainframe, which is just not something an SME can do. So there was a real need to disaggregate the services as well.
Great, and you mentioned GPs then, which I thought was quite interesting, because obviously now with budgets moving to CCGs, they seem to be quite a keen market for lots of suppliers. But in your experience, was SME inclusion easier in some parts of public sector, like GPs, for example, or was it just a general across the board? It's been tough wherever we looked.
I think it was easier in some parts,
Right.
where there's small organisations like GP surgery, where they're kind of have mastery of their own destiny to an extent, their own purse. Certain sort of semi-governmental organisations, small organisations doing a particular bit of work, or a bit like the charity sector, or non-for-profit. That was certainly an area we could get into. Local government to an extent as well. I think local government did have an appetite for some SMEs, for some particular areas, not so much in the IT space. The IT space was very sewn up by one or two big names,
Right.
But certainly sort of for wider things. But central government, I would say, was very closed. If you wanted to get into central government, you'd have to be friends with an SI really, and they'd make you part of their supply chain. But then there's lots of horror stories as well about SMEs being quite badly treated and almost bullied by their sort of incumbent SIs, and a bit of an abuse of power going on. They own the contract, so thou shalt do what we want, kind of thing.
Yeah. Thinking about the current situation, what's changed particularly? And obviously you mentioned in one of your answers about previous tenders being all-encompassing. They were broad, and it was hard for a small supplier which only offers one element to bid. Has that changed now? Are you seeing tenders become smaller and I guess more suitable for SMEs?
I would say that tenders broadly haven't changed significantly.
Right.
There is some improvement, but the thing that's really changed is G-Cloud, absolutely. So G-Cloud has brought around a different way to sell and a different way to buy, and most importantly, a different way to buy. I was involved with G-Cloud as the technical architecture co-lead back in 2009, 2010. And one of our mantras then was about disintegrating the stack, so that somebody could buy their hosting from one provider and their software from another provider, and their sort of managed services from another, and maybe integrate it themselves, or maybe buy the integration service from yet another sort of consultancy provider. So you could have little collectives of SMEs working together to deliver an end-to-end solution.
Right.
And that's certainly started to happen. We're certainly seeing government customers coming to us wanting to buy just the infrastructure, for example, and they're going to then buy the software from somewhere else and integrate it themselves. So that's definitely a big step forwards. Also, the length of contracts, that's got to be a big one. Tenders would often be for huge lengths of time,
Right.
and also looking for daft things like not just everything bundled together, but demonstration that you've sold to 30 other similar tenders, which kind of a bit of a barrier to entry.
Yeah.
So G-Cloud has really helped to break those things down.
Right.
You're sort of pre-accredited. It's bite-sized chunks that an SME can deliver. Usually can deliver much more cheaply as well because they're really specialist in that space.
Yeah.
And the encouragement not to try and buy everything from a one-stop shop, but actually to shop around and buy the logically different components from different providers.
Okay. Has there been much difference, says loosely, between what the government wanted to do for SMEs and what's actually happened? And by way of example, I saw that you, in one of your articles, were endorsing the 2-year cap on contract terms, which I think is a good thing. And the government also talked about a £100 million cap on certain contracts. Have there been other things that you've seen them promise would be ways of getting SMEs involved that haven't quite happened yet, that you'd still like to see pushed through, or is everything they've said we're going to do, they've done?
I think the government have done most of the things they've said that they are going to do for SMEs. There has been talk about things like mandating that a certain amount of business goes to SMEs, like you have in the US. That's politically sort of unfavourable, I think. So there's the aspirational target of 25%
right.
instead.
Yeah.
They're supposedly moving towards that. Personally, I'd like to see a little bit more evidence of the split and the spread of that to ensure that it is genuine, and also they're including the entire supply chain in that. So how much of that is large incumbents fronting a deal and there being sort of
Right.
supply chain SMEs, which perhaps isn't such a bad thing. I think the only way in which I feel perhaps government is failing SMEs is in the rate of adoption of G-Cloud.
Right.
I think they could do a lot more in terms of really pushing the message out. I mean, I know they have difficulties with mandating to departments, particularly local government, that thou shalt. But the savings, we're talking about at least one order of magnitude. When you come to the SaaS stuff, it's potentially 2 orders of magnitude savings. And I think there isn't enough pressure on government departments, central and local, to save money still. And we all know the state of the economy. We all know it's still hard times, despite what the Chancellor says. And I think they could be doing more to push that message and actually to sell G-Cloud to their own people.
Great. The 25% figure is interesting. I mean, it still would suggest that 75% is going to larger businesses. So, I mean, I suppose maybe it's not the place to argue whether the percentage figure is right, but how do you feel about that? Do you think it needs to shift in the future? Should it be 50% and an equal split between SMEs and large businesses, or did they get it right in the first place?
When it comes to whether the 25% figure is right or not, I am a little biased. I'm in the 25%, but actually I passionately believe that the real strength of the UK economy is in the SMEs, and I'm not talking about the really micro businesses. SME in the broadest context, they're the real engines of growth in the UK. They're the engines of innovation. Large companies have their place; they're very important. They're the mainstays. But when you're trying to introduce real transformation in government, and really shake things up, really do things in a different way, continue to be a world leader, I think you need those smaller companies. And they're the ones that are creating the jobs. They're the ones that are mostly keeping their revenues within the UK. I know that's a difficult one because we have to be, all inclusive. But yeah, so I would like to see that figure moved once it's hit.
Sure. And I noticed the most recent figures for SME inclusion, the official ones are 2012, 2013, and it was 10.5% for direct sales to SMEs and 19.5%, I think, from indirect, which is one of the points you were making earlier about companies partnering. Do you think there needs to be that distinction? Does it matter as long as the money is heading in the right direction? Does it matter that it came about via partnerships? And I guess in a way that those partnerships have to be done, really. That's what the public sector needs in some cases.
I think it does matter to an extent how much of the spend is directly going to SMEs and how much is indirect via partnerships with an SI or other company fronting it. Often to get the best value, you do need to go direct to the SME. When an SME is part of a larger organisation's supply chain, there are percentage points being added on at each level, and from my personal experience, larger organisations tend to be very inefficient. There's a lot of padding that happens. And I think it means that the SMEs aren't really able to fully expose their wealth to the government client if they're sort of behind the scenes and forming a small cog. I would much prefer to see it more as a partnership. So, both organisations working towards the same goal, as somebody said actually in the room earlier, but both actually directly a customer of the government department, both with their own independent contracts, with full visibility to the government department of who's delivering the service and what they're paying for the individual elements.
Great. You mentioned about local authorities earlier, which seem to be getting a hard time in a way today for not adopting G-Cloud as quickly as they should have or could have, or and you mentioned pressure from government. Is there anything else we can be doing to make local authorities adopt quicker? Because obviously that would help suppliers like yourselves and many others. What do we need to do to get them involved more?
Local government is a bit bizarre, I must admit. I think the pressure to save money for some reason hasn't filtered down to them very much. I happen to know my local council is swimming in money, for example. So I think that's part of it. The other issue is that they're really afflicted by the sort of tin pot empire IT manager. He's got his little empire, he's got his few people, he's got his little data center, which is usually hideously insecure. I've been around some supposedly official accredited local government data centers, and it's frankly frightening. So they're kind of keeping their claws into that. The CIOs aren't necessarily don't have the technical calibre of some of the CIOs within central governments. Maybe they don't get it quite so much. And they do business cases based on bizarre metrics. We've tried to engage with some local government organisations, and they somehow make a business case where it makes sense to spend £5 million building a new data centre last year. I won't name names, rather than going to the cloud. And the real frustration is their security requirements are actually such that they do everything over the internet. They're generally not dealing with high sensitivity information. Right. For the small things they are, G-Cloud is still appropriate. They can just look to the official over encrypted PSN or old IL3 levels. But they regard that everything, all of their stuff needs to be at what was IL3. Also, they don't understand the difference between IL3 and official, which is another barrier to entry. The message hasn't really got through to them. So I think there's a bigger cultural change that needs to happen within local government, which unfortunately can't be mandated by central government. Right.
I always hate to give the public sector all of the work to do in these things. Do you think there's work for suppliers that need to so rather start that again? Is there work that suppliers need to do as well? I appreciate that lots of suppliers have put themselves forward for G-Cloud, but there's obviously somewhere not enough sales happening. I spoke to a lot of suppliers today that said we've not quite got what we were expecting from G-Cloud. Is there things that suppliers need to be doing as well? What have you done, for example, at Memset to win more business through G-Cloud?
I think there is work to be done by the supplier community as well as government in terms of improving adoption of G-Cloud and G-Cloud services. There's a big educational piece, and I think it's one that we can't expect the GDS to be doing on their own. When going out to customer potential prospects and customers, we always try and educate them as much as possible. Often we have a better understanding of things like the new security accreditations than they do, we found. Right. Even basic understandings of, what cloud is all about. I mean, I personally spend a lot of time speaking at conferences, and I try and get out there. And I try and avoid making it a sales pitch. And I know it's very hard to convince people to do that, but actually trying to be the educator is really important. And ultimately, it does win you business.
Great. I think maybe just final question for you, really, which, as you mentioned, sales pitch, maybe it's a nice point to talk about Memset recently. I saw a story recently where you talked about, you were hoping, I think, to achieve turnover of 7 million by the end of Q3, which I guess is coming up for you soon. Well, as we move into the new calendar year, what's the future going to hold, I suppose, for Memset, and what do you hope to get out of G-Cloud going forward?
Yeah, this year's been a little bit slack for us, but that's mainly because we've been very busy investing. So we've now got our shiny new ultra energy efficient IL3 or official over PSN, encrypted PSN accredited data center. we're in talks with a number of large central government departments who have some quite exciting projects that seem to be coming our way. And we're starting to look as well. I mean, one of the things we've had to flex actually is a lot of government departments aren't quite ready to buy pure cloud, so we're spinning up a managed services division to help those government departments which need to transition from the old world to the new, need a bit of migration assistance, need a bit of bespoke stuff alongside the cloud services. So we've been very busy, but it's a very exciting future. In fact, we think we may have be about to be a victim of our own success, such that we're actually looking for some funding, right, so that we can actually cater to the what we think might be the demand incoming. G-Cloud has been slower than we would have liked. We sort of done about £500,000 of business through it, which is not to be sniffed at. We're a small business, but we'd like that to be larger. And I think there's real potential for that to be a lot larger. So we're well positioned. It's a very exciting time for us.
Good, thanks.